No one could tame the ruthless billionaire. No doctor, no lawyer, no assistant who lasted more than a season. Until two little girls did what no one else could. Victor Calloway wasn't simply difficult. He was a force of destruction dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. At 44, he had built a real estate empire worth more than some countries, and he wielded that power like a weapon against anyone who came near. His eyes were sharp and dark, the kind that didn't ask questions, they issued verdicts. His temper wasn't something that flared occasionally. It was the air he breathed, constant, suffocating, and absolutely merciless. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what time it is and where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's get back to our story. Victor had dismissed 7 physicians in 4 months. Not because they were incompetent, because they dared to look him in the eye and tell him the truth. When Dr. Harmon gently suggested that Victor's blood pressure was reaching dangerous levels and that he ought to consider slowing his schedule, Victor had hurled a brass desk clock at the wall so close to the man's ear that he heard the wind of it. "You're finished," Victor had snarled, his voice cold as a blade. "I'll make sure you never practice medicine in this city again. Get out of my house before I have security drag you out." Dr. Harmon hadn't even bothered to argue. He simply gathered his things and left, just like the 6 before him. The staff had memorized that particular tone. Once Victor's voice dropped to that low, lethal register, it meant someone was about to lose something, their job, their peace, or whatever was left of their pride. The moment the heavy oak door slammed shut, Victor gripped the edge of his mahogany desk and squeezed until his knuckles went pale. The headache behind his eyes detonated like a grenade. The room tilted, his vision frayed at the corners. For 3 terrifying seconds, he couldn't feel his left hand. Then it passed, and he stood rigid, jaw clenched, refusing to acknowledge what his body was screaming at him. He'd built his entire life on never showing weakness. He wasn't about to start now. Down in the kitchen, 2 small figures moved quietly through the clatter of dishes. Sasha and Lena were 8-year-old twins, identical in every detail, from their dark braided hair tied with white ribbons to the tiny black dresses and white aprons they wore each day. Where one went, the other followed. Where one sensed something, the other already knew. They were the youngest members of Victor's household staff, though staff stretched the truth. Their mother, Diane, was his head housekeeper, a woman who had kept his estate running like clockwork for 6 years. 7 months ago, a devastating illness had brought her to her knees. Facing months of hospitalization and no family to speak of, she had done the only thing a desperate mother could do. She went to Victor. She didn't beg prettily. She looked him straight in the eye and asked him to let her daughters remain in the house rather than be swallowed by the foster care system. Victor had agreed, but only on his terms. The girls would earn their keep. They would clean, stay out of sight, and cause no disruption. They would be invisible. And so they were. Mostly. "He fired the doctor again," Sasha murmured as Victor's shouting ricocheted through the walls. Lena didn't look up from the pot. She was scrubbing. "Mama says he's getting worse." "I know." Sasha set down a glass carefully. "I can feel it. Something in his head. It's been building for weeks." The girls exchanged a look only they could fully read. They had never been able to explain what they could do, not even to each other, not fully. It had started when their mother first got sick 2 years ago now. They'd known before the doctors. They'd pressed their small hands to her back while she slept, concentrating in the quiet way they'd learned, and in the morning she'd said the pain had eased. She cried the first time she understood what had happened. "You have something rare," she'd whispered, pulling them both close. "Something that frightens people who don't understand it. You must never show anyone. Promise me." They had promised. So now, feeling the wrongness radiating off Victor Calloway like heat from a stove, they said nothing. They only watched. At 3:12 in the afternoon, the entire household shattered. It was Thomas, Victor's personal assistant, who found him. Victor was slumped sideways on the leather sofa in his study, his face the color of old candle wax, his breathing so shallow it barely disturbed the air. His eyes were rolled back. His body had gone rigid. Thomas stood frozen for one catastrophic second, then sprinted into the hallway. "Call an ambulance. Mr. Calloway has collapsed. He's not responding." The house erupted. The butler rushed in and grabbed Victor's shoulder, shaking him hard. Nothing. Two housekeepers stood in the doorway, one with her hand pressed over her mouth. Thomas dialed emergency services with shaking fingers. Diane, who had been in the upper hallway folding linens, heard the commotion and came running, but her daughters had already passed her on the stairs. "Girls, stop. Get back." Diane shouted. They didn't stop. Sasha and Lena moved through the crowded doorway with a quiet certainty that made grown adults part for them without quite knowing why. They reached the sofa where Victor lay dying and knelt on either side of him. "Everyone needs to step back, please," Sasha said. Her voice was not loud, but something in it made the butler actually take a step backward. Lena placed her small palm flat against Victor's chest and closed her eyes. A moment of pure stillness. "His heart is beating too slowly," she said quietly, with the calm of someone reading from a page. "Around 38 beats per minute. There's a blockage. Left side. Stopping blood flow to part of his brain." The room went so silent that the hum of the refrigerator could be heard from the kitchen. "She's right," Sasha said, pressing both hands lightly to Victor's temples, eyes closed. "There's enormous pressure building. If we don't help him right now, he won't survive until the ambulance arrives." You're 8 years old," Thomas whispered. "Please be quiet," Sasha said, not unkindly. "We need to concentrate." What happened next was something that everyone present would spend the rest of their lives struggling to describe. The twins positioned themselves precisely. Sasha's hands rested at his temples, Lena's on his chest and forehead. They became utterly still, not the stillness of children trying to be calm, but something older and deeper than that. Faces peaceful, breathing slow and synchronized. Then warmth began to radiate from their palms. Not imagined warmth. Actual, physical heat that the people standing nearest could feel against their own skin. One of the housekeepers later said she saw a faint luminescence around the girl's fingers, like light passing through thin paper. She said it quietly, half expecting to be dismissed. No one dismissed her. For 90 seconds, the twins held their positions without moving. Then Victor Calloway gasped. It was a great, gulping, desperate breath, the sound of a man being pulled back from somewhere very far away. His eyes flew open. Color rushed into his face like water filling a glass. His body relaxed in one long shudder. He blinked confused and looked up at the two small girls kneeling over him with expressions of focused calm. "Who are you?" he rasped. His voice was barely audible. "You know who we are," Lena said gently. "Diane's daughters." "What did you do to me?" "You were dying," Sasha said simply. "A blood vessel in your brain had blocked. We helped it." Paramedics arrived 11 minutes later. They found Victor sitting upright on the sofa, color restored, responding clearly to questions. The lead paramedic, a veteran named Marcus Webb, checked his vitals twice because the first reading didn't make sense. "We received a report of a major cardiac and neurological event," Marcus said slowly. "Your vitals are completely stable. What happened here?" No one in the room could answer that in a way that sounded believable. At the hospital, doctors ran every scan available. MRI, CT, full neurological workup. The results left the team in silence. The imaging showed unmistakable evidence of a recent serious blockage, one that should have caused catastrophic damage or death. But it also showed something that had no business existing. Newly formed vascular pathways, created in minutes, the kind of biological adaptation that typically required weeks or months under the best circumstances. "I've reviewed this twice," neurologist Dr. Aisha Patel told Victor on his third day of admission, setting down the scan results. "Your brain essentially rebuilt its own plumbing in real time. Whatever took place before emergency services arrived didn't just save you. It prevented permanent damage that should have been irreversible." Victor stared at the ceiling for a long time. "It was two 8-year-old girls," he said finally. "They put their hands on me." Dr. Patel said nothing for a moment. Trauma can sometimes create fragmented memories. 20 people watched it happen. Victor turned to look at her. I don't need you to believe me. I know what I know. He returned home on a Friday evening, quieter than his staff had ever seen him. He spent 3 days barely speaking, moving through the house with the careful deliberateness of a man who had walked very close to an edge and could still feel the air from a drop. He thought about Sasha and Lena constantly, about how he had made them scrub floors and disappear into the walls of his house, about how they had run toward him anyway. On the 4th evening, he asked Diane to bring her daughters to his study. They entered together, holding hands, their faces carefully neutral the way children's faces go when they're trying not to show they're afraid. Sit down, Victor said. His voice had changed. Something in it had been filed down, softened in a way none of his staff had ever heard before. I need to understand what happened. All of it. No omissions. Diane exhaled slowly. She told him everything. The gift that had appeared when the girls were 4. The way they had sensed her illness before any machine caught it. The way they had kept her alive, not by curing her, but by easing the damage, giving her body more time. The doctors gave me 3 months, she said. That was 7 months ago. Victor looked at the twins for a long time. Why didn't you tell me? Lena looked at her hands. Because you would have made us leave. The shame that moved through Victor Calloway in that moment was unlike anything his wealth could deflect. She's right, he said. I would have. His voice cracked at the edge, just slightly. So why help me? Sasha looked up at him with eyes that held nothing complicated. Because you were hurting, she said. And we could. Victor pressed his hand over his mouth and turned toward the window. The transformation that followed wasn't dramatic or sudden. It didn't happen in a single speech or a single gesture. It was slower than that and more real. Within a week, Victor had called a full staff meeting. He stood in front of the people he had terrorized for years and said plainly that he had been wrong, not as a boss, but as a person. He announced immediate raises across the board, comprehensive medical benefits, and reasonable hours. He arranged for Sasha and Lena to be enrolled in one of the city's finest schools, fully funded, effective immediately. He told Diane that her salary was doubling and that her position was guaranteed regardless of her health. The older housekeeper who had watched the twins kneel over Victor's dying body wept openly. Others applauded. Victor didn't take a bow. He just nodded and left the room. Months passed. Researchers, kind ones chosen carefully, came to study the twins, not to dissect them, but to understand. What they found was staggering. With a single touch, the girls could identify medical conditions with extraordinary accuracy, detecting problems that standard imaging had not yet confirmed. In acute emergencies, their interventions seemed to accelerate healing in ways that had no clinical explanation. But Victor was meticulous about one thing. The research would never come before the girls. They attended school. They made friends. They played. On 2 afternoons per week, for 2 hours, they visited the clinic that Victor built and funded in a neighborhood that had never had access to decent medical care. They would sit with patients, hold their hands, whisper quietly to the doctors what they sensed. Conditions caught early. Rare diseases identified. Lives pulled back from the edge. People called them the Angel Twins. Victor would sometimes sit in the clinic's waiting room and watch through the glass. Sasha, focused and unhurried, holding the hand of an elderly man with frightened eyes. Lena making a sick child laugh while simultaneously sensing the nature of his pain. Diane appeared beside him one afternoon. You look different, she said. I am different. He was quiet for a moment. They didn't just save my life. They reminded me I had one worth living. Diane smiled and said nothing more. A year later, the man that Victor Calloway used to be was almost unrecognizable to his staff, to his colleagues, and most of all, to himself. He had donated generously to medical research, built a second clinic, and quietly funded a scholarship program for children from households like the one he had run. But what mattered most, what he returned to in his mind on the evenings he sat alone, was the image of 2 small girls in white aprons, kneeling without hesitation over the body of a man who had given them every reason to walk away. They hadn't even considered it, and neither would he anymore. If this story moved you, hit like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of quiet miracles and unexpected grace, and ring the notification bell so you never miss one.